Hello and welcome back to Parents Canada Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jason Thompson. I'm here with the fabulous co-host,
Lisa Durante.
Lisa, how's it all going this week?
It's going well. It's actually been pretty good. The kids are in camp. They're settled down, so life is good.
It's the rhythm of that summer, right?
Yeah.
The whole idea of that there comes a point where it's almost like when the school year goes on, when you get to October and you feel really good. Like in my house, there is that kind of drumbeat. Now, of course, I have 3 kids who could show up or might be with me at any point during the day or any of the week. So I kind of have to monitor each of those streams. So I've had one in camp the last couple of weeks, which has been great, but knowing that I got to pick up at 4:30 every single day. I've got one who's off to university, so we're doing that whole thing. And then I have a 13-year-old who, to me, it's really fascinating because she is just starting to have that social circle where she's trying to get a little bit more independence.
Yeah.
Which makes our topic today absolutely perfect. We're going to be talking about autonomy over the next couple of minutes, I guess 49 to 52 minutes. So we're going to talk with Katie Dupuis, who is actually the editor-in-chief from ParentsCanada, a little bit later, and having some of her insights. She has kids. She has thoughts on the whole idea of autonomy. But before that, I just want to make sure that we cover off everything that's going on in your world. Anything interesting happening as a parent?
I have to say no, and it's been lovely. There's nothing. Nothing's out of the blue. We're on the schedule. We're getting up. Mornings are actually, because the bus for camp picks them up early, an hour earlier than school starts. So there's no time for playing and missing the start time of school, which was always, so all the issues that we had in the morning with school are kind of disappeared right now. But I know it's coming. Like we're going to go through a wave, and it will not be good in a couple of weeks. But right now, I'm just enjoying life. How about you?
That's That's really nice to hear. That's a hard thing for a parent to kind of admit sometimes. I'm just enjoying life, right? Because we just feel we're always so scattered and chasing things around. Yesterday, something like that happened to me yesterday. So one of my favorite things in the world, my favorite toys in the world, is something called Ansi Pants.
It's great that you love toys.
I love toys. I'm swear to God, I'm a giant Peter Pan. So there's a company called Ansi Pants. They don't sell in Canada. I think I found them at Target in the U.S. And they're a series of rods that connect together, and then fabric drapes over the rods, right? So they have like a pirate ship. They have a ball pit. But my very favorite thing is a lemonade stand. So you bought it. So you put all the rods together and you put the lemonade stand fabric over top, and you have what looks like a really good official lemonade stand, which really helps out with kind of your ADD, because it's like, okay, it's got to look right. It's got to look perfect. Can't look like a hand-drawn sign. Has to look amazing. So we do that, right? And they're really light. So my 8-year-old loves this idea. And once a summer, she goes, can we do the lemonade stand? And then yesterday she dragged it out, and I thought, you feel like you're going to have that moment where you're going to have to break it to them that nobody's going to buy their lemonade and things like that. She made $16.
Yeah, great. Yeah,
right?
I think lemonade stands are awesome.
Not only was everybody in the neighborhood come over, but all the kids came over. They wanted to help out, and so they brought cookies, and they brought, we didn't have any lemonade, so we used Tang. Which, by the way, I didn't realize they still made Tang, but somebody gave me one as a joke not too long ago. So she puts up the lemonade stand, and then my favorite part is at the end of the lemonade stand, when it's all over, she actually starts divvying up the money, and she goes, well, these people were only here for about half the time, so I'm going to give them a little bit less. I'm going to make sure they're okay with it. She's like a little entrepreneur making it all happen. I love that stuff.
Yeah. And just the way, so my youngest she's a saleswoman in the making. She can sell you anything. We call her the hustler. There's a song from the 80s or 90s. Every day I'm hustling is like the chorus. And it rings in my head every time I see her doing these things. And so she can get people to pay like $5 for a little cup of lemonade. She'll just like give them her little doe eyes, and I'm like, you do it.
Get her the lemonade.
You do your
stand.
thing.
There you go. I'm going down to the States this week. I'll pick you one up. It'll be fantastic.
Well, for her, it's just she stands out in the front with a little table. She doesn't need any signs. She just uses her voice.
That's just going to hold me back.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting, like as we're kind of exploring this, it does really lead into the topic we want to talk about today, which is this idea of autonomy. When I say that word, it probably makes something pop in your head. Even for us, it really made kind of different mindsets around that. And it's a spectrum, like everything with parenting. On the one end, remember about 10 years ago, there was that news story that came out about the woman in New York City who let her 9-year-old take the subway. And I only mention that because there's such a visceral response to it from some people about, what that looks like. How could you do that? And this was kind of early in the days where helicopter parenting was really becoming a word, a phrase, an approach sort of thing. So that's at one end of the spectrum. I think we see less people getting less freaked out by that more, and more what they're really thinking about is, what is my responsibility as a parent to help my kids get ready for whatever, being a good adult, right? So, my 8-year-old, for example, she is petrified of knives. Oh. Which is interesting to me because, I teach my kids to cook, and I've said to her straight up, if you were afraid of the tool, that's where it gets dangerous. Because if you're afraid of it, then you're going to use it incorrectly. So I'm, trying to encourage her. But on the other end of the spectrum, I have this 13-year-old who's trying to kind of explore what her world looks like. And so every day she wants to kind of walk around the neighborhood with a bunch of friends and just kind of, go sit at the Starbucks and things like that. I've been pretty good with that. And the reason I've been pretty good with it is because it's like with everything with parenting is there's no blanket solution. For her, she's really a responsible kid, and I want her to have this experience. I want her to kind of see what that looks like to a point. Because 2 weeks ago, it was 11 o'clock. I'm in bed. I get a text. It's her in her bedroom. She texts me and she goes, hey, you're probably going to say no, but my friend's over at the Tim Hortons right now. Can I go hang out with him? So that was I'm getting out of bed to go and have a chat moment, because that one to me makes me uncomfortable on a couple of levels. Sure, there's the concept of, do I want a 13-year-old out at 11 o'clock at night? No, I think that crosses the boundary that I feel comfortable with as a parent. But I think more importantly, what I said to her is, you can't just spring something like this on your parent, like in real time, because he's sitting over there. Can I go right now? This is a bigger conversation, and this is a conversation that I have to include your mom in. And I said straight up, I don't feel this is an appropriate place to go. So she did not end up going out that night. But we used that as kind of a framework to begin the conversation of what is the boundary and what should that look like. So that, when I talk about autonomy, that's what I think about. I'd love to hear from your perspective what it means.
Well, because I do have younger kids, so autonomy and it's something that I've been doing with them since they were very, very young. There was one of the articles from ParentsCanada that we read on our website that, talked about just even parents, as children start to walk, that the parents cannot catch them. They have to fall on their bottom, and then they have to pick themselves up. And that is teaching them autonomy. And then as they grow, like if I think back to my children, we did that. We allowed them to fall multiple times, even though there were many times where I tried to catch her. And we had a lot of sponge stuff around sharp corners and all that. But we allowed her to fall, both of them to fall. But then as they got older, they were given responsibilities. We always lived in small spaces, so our kids had to clean up their toys every night, and they weren't allowed to have them. And also because, I just like things to look good. So they needed to clean up their toys every day. If they played with them, they would then tidy them up, put them back in their box or their place. Many times it would kind of overflow out of the box. And then as they got older, they, when they were 3, they had to, after they finished eating, they would have to pick up their dish and put it on the sink, or if it was a plastic one, then they can throw it into the sink. And now, it's about clearing the table. They have responsibilities. They have to make their bed every day. They have to set the table. So they have chores. And they have to participate in the family. So that's all autonomy building. That's providing them the skills and the independence. And I think when you give them responsibility, a child thrives, because then they can see that they can do something, and then that builds their confidence to do something else, so that they'll be ready for the next thing that you give them.
Yeah, the data really does support that, right? I'm curious, we seem to be relatively aligned with kind of that approach. Do you have, I don't know that I have a lot of friends who are, I say that, and now I'm kind of thinking about that, who kind of hoverers or kind of, want to do stuff for my kids. I talked to somebody at an event I did a couple of years ago, and they said that they're getting 20-somethings whose parents are calling in to follow up for their resumes. Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, you do hear a lot of examples. And from very young, I do know a lot of parents of young kids who are hoverers or helicopter parents. And then there are, as the kids get older, then you're really starting to see the lawnmower parenting, where they're trying to get the burdens out of the way. And in our next segment, we're going to be speaking with Katie Dupuis, who is our editor-in-chief at ParentsCanada magazine. And she will be sharing a little bit more about, about helicopter parents and lawnmower parents and what we can do to start breaking some of that down and giving our kids a little bit more autonomy. So you are listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960, and we're going to be right back after this. And we're back. Welcome back to Parents Canada Radio on News Talk Saga 960. I'm Lisa Durante, and I'm here with my co-host,
Jason Thompson. I had to remember my name for a second.
And we are speaking in studio with Katie Dupuis. First off, before we get into her bio and any of that, we just want to first say thank you. This show would not exist without Katie's guidance every week, her emails on,
She sends out these great emails,
Yeah.
like full of like all these links and insights, and she lines up all of these guests. It is a incredible level of backflip, which I think is amazing because you did all of this and you just launched a brand new website at the same time. So have you slept?
I don't really sleep, no. I'm not very good at sleeping.
Well, let's officially welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you. I'm
Katie.
excited to be here in person.
Yeah. So Katie is a journalist and a mom of two girls, ages 7 and 4. So she's got little ones, not too much younger than mine. She has worked for some of Canada's biggest media brands with a special interest in parenting content. And right now she is, like we said, the editor-in-chief of Parents Canada. And if you have not taken a look at our new website, please get online and do that today. So Katie, we've been talking about autonomy, and there is this wide spectrum. And what we're hearing is about helicopter parents and lawnmower parents. And then there's, maybe on the other side is where Jason and I are, where it's more about teaching and building that independence.
Yeah.
What are you, because you're so deep in the parenting world, what do you see? What are you hearing?
My feeling about autonomy is that you are essentially teaching your child to be a functioning adult. And so, the goal of parenting for all of us is to, release these hooligans into the world. And you hope that you've done your job, right? You hope you've given them all the tools to be, successful, thriving adults. And of course, there are hiccups, and of course you have to step in and help, and of course there are, you're there for guidance. But at the end of the day, I think if you don't give enough opportunity for kids to make their own decisions and to make mistakes and to figure things out, then it's a bit of a disservice because, and that's the lawnmower parenting idea, which is that, you kind of mow down all the obstacles in their way. And so in doing that, like I feel, and we have lots of content on the website about it, you're hindering their ability to build resilience and to be in the world and to, make decisions. I've said this off air, and I say this quite a bit, that I'm looking to retire as a parent. And it's not that my love will ever stop or that my worrying will ever stop. It's just I want to stop doing that everyday stuff, doing the reminders, making sure that they have everything that they need for their day. I want them to be able to do that for themselves, just as I'm able to do that. Well, you don't want to think 15 years ahead and your child is, has their first job and they can't remember to bring their lunch to work, right? Like if you do that all the time, then they're never going to learn that.
Yeah.
Now, you got two little ones.
Yep.
So how does that kind of factor, like, what's your story and how do you kind of promote autonomy in your own house?
I mean, I do a lot of the big thing that my kids will eventually say. They're 7 and 4, so I don't know that they figured it out yet, but eventually they're going to say, oh my God, my mom and the words I don't know. Because, they will come to me with a problem and I will say, okay, so what do you think the solution is? Like, what can we do to fix that problem? And if they know that they can't say, I don't know. They just can't. And so if they do, I'll say, nope, that's not the answer. Go away and think of 3 things and come back, 3 solutions and come back and we'll decide together which one is the best one, which one you can act on. And I honestly think that like they go away and think of 2 and then a throwaway. So like there's always a silly one, but that's fine. Like if they're thinking it through and they've got 2 good ones and 1 silly one, then at least it makes the narrowing down easier.
Yeah, I'm all about building that independence and teaching life skills, but on the other side, living such a busy life, there are times where I solve it for them because it's just faster and it's less annoying and there's less time needed.
You can't, like, that's the thing. we like to beat ourselves up as parents to say, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But the thing is it's not a habit, right? It's an occasional sort of thing. It's like being able.
I think the problem is it can quickly turn into a habit.
It
Right.
becomes a habit, and there are times where I see myself stopping myself. Like, so I had last start of school, had bought my daughter tie-up laces. She was just turned 7, and she couldn't figure it out. And we had to get out in the morning because the mornings there's always a problem. And so I just started tying them for her. And it was, then they would come, the problem was that they would come undone during school and she couldn't tie them.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, well, that's a problem. So let's, start the morning earlier, are trying to get out the door a little bit earlier so she had that time to practice and do it on her own, just so that I wouldn't jump in and do it for her.
But again, you were aware that could.
Well, it took some time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, again, listen. I'm doing stuff with my kids to try and get them towards a specific outcome, and you think to yourself, how long have I been doing this? It's been like 4 or 5 years. Listen, last week, so my son going to university in the fall. He has not actually landed a gig because nobody wants to hire somebody for 4 or 5 weeks and that sort of stuff. So we are doing other things. He's been teaching himself physics and things like that. But there was 2 days in a row where he got up really late. And I can remember, I'm like driving home, I'm talking to my mom, and I'm like, he's not up yet. He's going to hear from me. And I literally went into the house and I read him the Riot Act. There were lots. He's 18 now. There were a couple of 4-letter words in there to be able to get him up. But you know what? For the next 2 weeks, he didn't slide again. So sometimes I guess you got to be aware, and sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So, but. From your perspective, Katie, like, you hear us telling these stories. This whole idea of helicopter and now lawnmower parenting, do you see this as kind of something that's on the rise? Is it falling back? Are we coming to our senses?
No, I don't think we're coming to our senses personally. I think that there are lots of parents like the three of us that are aware that this is a problem and try to consciously pull back. But I do think that it's kind of the expected thing, I think you're kind of expected there to be a certain level of helicoptering or lawn mowering. And I kind of think we all have to be a little more conscious to not do it as much. I think that, I was thinking about the fact that I was a resident assistant at university, and I would have parents calling me to ask if the kids who lived on my floor, their kids who lived on my floor, were doing their homework. Well, that was 15 years ago. So I can imagine it's even worse now, right?
Yeah, and those young adults who were in school at the time are now in the workplace,
right.
And their parents could be doing the same thing, because I've seen it happen with my own eyes and ears.
Yeah. So I think that I don't know. I wish that I could say that it was somehow being curbed. I don't actually think that's true. I do think that we're more aware. I think that we're more conscious of the fact that it's happening. I think some people are fine with it because they just want to parent that way, and to each their own. I guess that's true, but I just think that eventually it becomes clear. Like, it becomes clear that there are children that are allowed some element of freedom to fail. Like, let's be real, it's failure. Or, at least the opportunity to fail.
I like to call it non-catastrophic failure. That's the goal.
Yeah. It's not catastrophic failure if you leave your lunch at home or you don't do your homework or whatever. But we had a couple of instances this year where my daughter didn't finish her homework. She didn't bring home the sheet, so we didn't see it. I mean, she was only in grade 2. But, there was should have been a note in her agenda that she had homework. She didn't write it down. So they called me from school and said, oh, Sophie says her homework's at school or at home. I'm like, well, Sophie can do it tonight then. I'm not bringing the homework. It's not happening. There has to be a natural consequence, right? There just has to be.
That's I was listening to the Knowledge Project, and there was a whole thing about parental coaching and about allowing the story that she gave, and I'm not sure if I've told it before, but the story she gave was, imagine that your child has a history test and you say, hey, you have a history test tomorrow. And he's like, yeah, I forgot my book at school. She said, what you do first is the first time around, you say, okay, let's go get your book, but this is a one-time only thing. Next time, it's up to you. So now you've set the boundary, right? And then next time around, you got to stick to it. She says, the next time around, when you say, oh, I forgot my book, you say, oh, that's unfortunate. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
Right? And she said, you've got to be okay with, they may go to the school to get it, they may borrow notes from a friend, or they might fail.
Yeah, they just might not do it. But there will be a natural consequence to that, right?
That's
there will
right.
be a bad grade.
Yeah, and they have to. That's the thing, is that will be a better teacher than you, kind of harping on them regularly.
And that's the decision. That is the decision to give autonomy you're allowing them to make their own choice there. And whether or not it's a choice that you agree with, it's hard on us as parents to not step in and say, okay, that's not the right choice, but they have to learn that, and they're not going to learn it unless something happens, unless there is a bad grade or a note from the teacher or whatever. It's just going to end up being that. And I do worry that, like, if helicopter parented kids, then have children, they are going to helicopter parent their kids, right? Like, we have to stop the insanity at some point.
Well, I think what's interesting is, and I would love to hear your perspective, just being, reading all the comments that come in from parents and hearing from them. I think a lot of times we are helicoptering. Like I gave the examples that we're busy and it's just faster, but sometimes it's also because we're afraid of the consequence of the judgment that is going to come to us. Parenting is a very judgment-filled business.
Yep.
I remember the first show when I said that to you. We all judge each other. You looked at me like, "Are you judging me right now?"
Well, we all, and so there are times. I remember when I moved into we moved into the current house we have. This was the first house we had. So first time we had like a little patch of grass, and it was in the front yard. And my daughter was just 1. And so I would plop her on the grass to just... No, she wasn't even 1 because she was still crawling. So I would plop her on the grass while I would bring in the groceries. It would be summer, it wasn't winter. So it was lovely weather.
Snowsuit, whatever, it's fine.
Yeah, so I'd plop her on the grass just to have some fun. And I remember the first time that a neighbor, like, I guess she lived somewhere on the street. She stood on the sidewalk in front of my grass and waited for me to come back.
Oh, yeah.
Out to get my daughter.
Yeah.
And I was like, she wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Like she could hardly crawl, and I was going in and out, and so she waited there, and she said, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you were coming back out." I was like, "My kid is outside. Like, of course I'm coming back out."
This is like leaving an item on the side of the hoping somebody will pick it up and then off they go, right?
So it is that judgment, and there are times, because now I have a 9-year-old, and I'm trying to give her a little bit more freedom, like walking around the block or walking to the park by herself. Usually, like, I'll give her like a 5-minute.
Well, I think
time.
Autonomy means different things to different families, right? And so I think the trick is to not judge each other for what the comfort level is. Like my kids, we've made friends with 2 families down the street, and when we go down and hang out there are 8 kids between these 3 families. So when the 8 kids are together, I don't actually worry. I don't actually worry about them at all, because if there's a problem, somebody's going to come and tell us. And so I do think that like, you kind of have to see how other families are and just be okay with how your family sort of interacts with them. But I don't know that judgment is ever a productive thing. And so I think you kind of just have to take the lessons from other people, right? I'm learning to be a much more autonomous parent because I've been hanging out with these 2 families down the street, right? I would say I was more helicoptery before we met them. So, I'm not a helicopter parent, but like, I feel like I, was even more so than I am now, because I just am kind of like, okay, they're going to be fine. Yeah.
One of the other things, Jason, we spoke about this a little bit, about when you have each parent is a bit different. So there's one who's a bit more of a helicopter parent and the other is not.
Well, it's interesting for me. So again, the 18-year-old, the mom and I, we parent differently. I would say that I try to put structure in because I know what the outcome is. I'm trying to create good adults. I've said this before. It's the idea that my kids need to get to a decision point in their early 20s, and I want them to be able to make the decision, not have the decision made for them. And so that requires things like being a bit of a self-starter, knowledge, and mom was a little more laissez-faire, right? Just kind of let things unfurl the way that they needed to unfurl. I worry about the 18-year-old off to university because I think he is lacking some of the skills. And I've never gotten anxious about my kids, about what the next step is for them. And I think about what's going to happen to him in September, and I'm nervous. I'm nervous about the workload in engineering is crushing in first year, and I'm like, is he up for it? The kid has never actually held a full-time job.
But he's teaching himself physics by himself. He's self-teaching himself physics.
That's the thing.
He's going to be fine. Don't worry, Jason. He's going to be good.
Here's the moment. It's so funny because a couple of years ago we were driving, right? And I was starting to fret about this already back then, and thinking, this kid, he's not a self-starter. And we're driving north to Innisfil, and he turns to me in the car and he says, I memorized the entire periodic table of the elements. You want to hear it? And I almost drove off the road because what I realized is he's spending all that time on his computer, and that's part of what he's doing. Sure, he's
Well, that's
playing.
self-starting, right?
Yeah, and so I
Yeah.
feel a little bit better then.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been trying to do is not, again, helicopter parent, but say, what are the skills he's lacking in right now, and how
Yeah.
can I maybe kind of encourage those?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think one question that has just popped into my head as we're talking about this is, where did this all happen? Because the next issue, I think we're going to be talking about the summer. What did you say?
The current issue. It's the
It's
issue
the
we just
current
launched.
issue.
Yeah, on the website. Yeah.
Is about the really bringing back the 70s and 80s summer.
Well, that's what I wrote about in my editor's letter is the 80s summer. So I accidentally am giving my children an 80s summer because I missed camp registration day.
Well, there you go.
So I basically have sort of made this 80s summer happen by forcing them to be bored. And so they're going to camp a little bit, but not as much as they would have if I hadn't missed the date.
But then I guess my question is, when did all this start? Like, when did we get? Is it a paranoia?
I think it's hard to pinpoint, but I think the paranoia started to rise, right? Like I think it started to be that we would see a lot more things that were happening in the news. So that's, I think, probably where.
And that's where it started. And then we started building on that.
I feel like we could probably spend 2 shows just talking about this. Unfortunately, we're running out of time for a segment. Katie, I cannot thank you enough for all your help and for
so
being here
fun.
today. It's really nice to also have a guest in the studio.
In studio, yes, that was
We want
fun.
to hear about your 70s and 80s summer too. So we'd love to hear from you on social media. We're on all the good ones: the Instagram, the Facebook, the Twitter. I like saying "the" before because then I sound really old. We're at ParentsCanada. In the meantime, we are going to go to break. So you've been listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio here on News Talk Saga 960. Welcome back to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. I'm Jason Thompson. I'm here with
Lisa Durante.
Lisa. That was, you know what? We probably could have talked all day with Katie.
Yeah, I think so.
She's got really great energy, really
know.
great insight, and I find I look at her and she's kind of another sobering thought sometimes. It's funny, this whole idea of autonomy is, I always kind of maybe gave it lip service before, like, yeah, I'm creating autonomy for my kids, but I'm really kind of doing a bit of a deep dive here, and I'm learning a ton out of this. What you took something away from Katie, didn't you?
Well, her story about when she was in university as an RA kind of struck out to me because, and I did say it while she was chatting, was that by helicopter parenting or lawnmower parenting these children, they not only go to school and expect us to take care of them, but then they go into the workplace. And, we're supposed to be raising our children to be part of our society. I'm not saying that we're trying to raise them to conform to our society, but they have to be a part of it, and they have to be a contributor, and they have to be a team player. Because if we're not all working together, things are going to start falling apart. And if you look in the workplaces, things are falling apart a little bit. I know in my experience, I've had people I have worked with who have called their children's managers to complain about how they are treating their children. I've also had, our groups have also had calls received from parents saying, my child wants this, lot of vacation time. And I was like, well, they've used up all their vacation time.
I was at a conference. They said that parents were calling in for sick days.
It's just insane to me. If my mother or father were to call my employer, I would die. I would want to just die. So it's just so foreign to me. So I can't imagine how they could how the parent thinks that it's okay and how the kid is okay with it.
Well, you asked a question a little while ago of Katie, that idea of, when this pivot started to happen.
Yeah.
And I wonder out loud, knowing my own personal experience, and I don't like to parent too much like by anecdote, but this idea of, for us as kind of growing and trying to create a better life for ourselves and that sort of stuff, is that we look and think that we can do these things better, including this idea of parenting. So, you look at kind of the Dr. Spock stuff that arrived in the late 60s, early 70s, and that kind of got the ball rolling. And it just seemed that the pendulum is swinging really far, that we look at our own personal experience. Like I have a friend who really doesn't want her kids ever to be disappointed, because when she was a kid, she experienced a lot of disappointment. Yeah. And that really factors into the way that she approaches things. I wouldn't consider her to be a total lawnmower parent, but there are some areas where she spends a lot of time making sure that the kids aren't disappointed because I almost feel like that when they're disappointed, it triggers her own memory of what it was like for her and how she feels. It's an interesting thing.
It is. And I think that happens not just in this situation, but in all situations of parenting. You know, we think back to how we were raised, and either it was a positive experience or we have a negative connotation to it. And then we either want to do the opposite or do the same, or we want to do it better. And I do hear a lot of that in my community. I have a lot of Italian family and friends, and, it's always about doing better than what you had. So growing up as children of immigrant parents, you didn't have a lot of stuff. And so it was always about, okay, we want to make a better life. And so we're going to give our kids more stuff. And that can kind of bite you back when you're giving too much stuff and not giving the autonomy that you had as yourself, because my generation, we were very autonomous. We had a lot of independence, sometimes too much, but we didn't have a lot of things. And then, now I see parents that are, this parenting kids my age or a bit older that are giving them a lot of stuff, but then not allowing them to have those experiences and that independence. And so it's kind of reversed. And you start to see as they get older, the impact it's having on them, again, being part of society, being out in the world with other people.
I had a friend who wrote a piece about millennials and incentives and talking about the Nintendo generation and how, if you look at kind of previous generations, the way that we looked at compensation and incentive in the workplace is that you show up and then, you receive a bonus at the end of the year. So, but then Mario comes along and Mario's getting a coin every single time down the road. And so the new reality is that the expectation in real life is that there is that level of recognition, that level of incentive and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the constant need for the next promotion when you've just been in the job for 6 months, a year.
I wonder sometimes if we're playing the stereotypes or if that actually is.
Well, So I always consider myself on the cusp of millennial. Maybe I'm just wishing and hoping. Because there are a lot of things that I have in common with that generation. And, but then there are certain things that I see that I'm like, well, this stereotype exists because it is happening multiple times and we're having these experiences. And so it is up to the individual to break some of those stereotypes because you don't want to go in judging beforehand. And I don't think I do that, or the people that I know that are in management positions, they don't go in saying, oh, it's another millennial. It's more something happens and they're like, this is what people are talking about.
Right.
So it comes from actual things happening that fit the stereotype.
Right.
But then this is Parents Canada Talk Radio, and it's on us. We're the ones who are guiding these kids. It's not innate for them to be so dependent on their parents. It's our making of that.
That's it. The more time that I spend with the show, because I actually use the show fairly frequently as a really educational base for us. We had a show on Summer Slide a couple of weeks ago, and it triggered something in me where I ended up taking my daughter to get an assessment on her math and opened up a whole Pandora's box, and a good one, of understanding of how to actually advance her towards better outcomes for high school and things like that. And so for here, I think it's really interesting to understand how with millennials, because I've got one, I guess, who would be on one of the end, and I think the youngest millennials are around 20-ish. Am I got that right? Maybe he's a Gen Zer. I
think they go up until, I think it's 1980 to 2000.
But being able to how to kind of parent them individually, because that's the hard thing, right? Is to kind of avoid some of those stereotypes, but look at to say, well, that rings a bell for me, and how. How do we deal with that? Speaking of how to deal with that, I know that we've had some questions on social media.
We have had some questions. So again, our social media handle is @ParentsCanada on everything from Insta to Facebook and Twitter as well. And if ever you want to reach out to me, you can reach me at lisa.durante, and I'm on Instagram and all of them as well. So one of the questions came from a father of a 3-year-old, and I had told him about the show, and he had said to me, I have a 3-year-old who is a three-nager. So if you haven't heard that term before, it's like terrible twos on steroids, because now they actually have some capability. They have more cognitive functions. And so they want to be independent. They don't want you to do anything for them. But the problem is that they don't actually have the physical capabilities to do the things. So if it's getting dressed in the morning, or there's a safety issues, or it's, they want to take a bath by themselves, they can't do these things. And so he was like, I want him to be more independent. I definitely don't want him to depend on me to do everything. But at the same time, we're at this crossroads where he wants more independence, but he actually can't do it. And so I'm having to do it. And so he was just asking for some advice on what's the right amount of help that I give and not. And I'm not sure we're the right ones to answer that, but even to have that conversation.
Well, I've heard a couple of things. Like when they get to 3, you're getting on the early spectrum of them being rational and having to have that conversation. Really starts to kick in around that 4 to 5 range. Yeah. But you can begin kind of like tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it, even if they're not totally absorbing it yet. You're creating a framework for that discussion, because this isn't the sort of thing that will go away immediately, because sometimes you just have to deal with people. I remember taking my son when he was 2 to Gymboree, and he just acted like he just didn't need me. I said, well, I'll come and pick you up in 16 years, sort of thing. Dealing with that is sometimes the reality, and they really want to push that. The other one that I've heard experts talk about is to give them some level of wins to help them kind of create that level of confidence.
Yeah.
I had a friend, who texts me after every show and to say, this is what I learned. And she talked about that idea of that autonomy is about trust, right? It's about you trusting them to be able to do something more, and them trusting you to give them the guidance, right? Yeah. And at 3, I mean, that's a difficult thing to kind of lay out, sort of thing. But that's really what's happening, right? Is that to be able to get there? Yeah. You had any thoughts?
Well, just to build on the trust there, it's also trust in yourself, and that comes from doing. I'm a big believer in doing, and so I had a 3-nager myself. My second was really, really hard at the age of 3 because she just wanted to do everything. Everything was a no. For us, like that was actually her first word was no. And it's still no for everything she does. But it was all about really helping her. So really taking time to teach. So one of the things I did was she very much wanted to walk up and down the stairs by herself. And I wasn't comfortable with her doing that because they're quite steep. It's an old house. And so it was like 2 hours on a Saturday, we went down on our bums teaching her how to go down the stairs. If you want to do this alone, this is the way you got to do it. And it took like time, and she fought me because she didn't want to do it. And so anytime she tried getting up on the stairs, I would pull her down and say, no, that's not how you go up or down. And remember how I taught you. So it was just that constant repetition and just teaching. And I think spending that time in teaching your child how to do something, and then they actually do it.
You think she was reacting to the modeling at first because you walking up and down the stairs?
Yeah. She wanted to be like her older sister. She wanted to be like me and her father. And she was just Miss Independent. And so it was like, no, you need to do it this way, and this is the only way.
I'm curious to know, like now, today, how old is she today?
She's now 7.
Okay, so she's 7. Does she still have that same independent streak?
Oh, yes. She's always been very, very independent. And so it's constantly building the teaching her, grooming her to take on the next level. So she loves to bake, and the stove, pulling out the rack out of an oven, 350 degrees. You're a bit worried about that, but it just took practice. And I was like, you have to wear these gloves, then you can pull it out.
I'm having heart palpitations right now. I'm thinking, oh, my 8-year-old take it. I'm like, yeah, I guess she could do it, but I don't want her to.
And it just took time to teach her to build up that skill. And now she also was terrified a little bit because you feel the heat from the oven, but she's built up the skill.
Right.
Which is, and then she trusts herself. She trusts that I will be there to help her. And so she's much more, she's okay and she's confident when she does things.
It's what's reminding me of is my son is getting ready to go for his driver's license, and getting in that car the first time and hanging on and trusting that he wasn't going to drive us off the road. That's a huge leap of faith, and you gotta kind of make sure that they're okay with that. Even we've been doing this now every night for the past 3 or 4 weeks, and it's still a little harrowing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know. And so I think we've run out of time again. Jason, we can just keep chatting about this. So you are listening to Parents Canada Radio, News Talk Saga 960. If you wanted to leave us a comment, let us know what you're thinking. Again, at Parents Canada on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Welcome back. You're listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. I'm Lisa Durante, and I'm here with my co-host
Jason Thompson.
Yeah, so we have spent the last hour talking about autonomy and raising children who are more autonomous. And we got to hear from Katie Dupuis, who is the editor-in-chief of Parents Canada magazine. So I would love to, just chat. What are you taking away from today? What did you learn?
The first thing I learned is what RA stood for. I don't think I ever thought that it stood for residence assistant. I never
you didn't
let
know
that
that?
cross my mind in my entire life. That was incredible. So.
I may just know that because I watched Felicity growing up. It was my favorite show, still is.
I'll be honest with you, I'm actually a little more anxious coming out of today's show than I was coming in. And that's because I never gave some specific thinking to autonomy before. It just felt like something that I did. And I think what I'm reacting to, again, is the 18-year-old going off to university. The more I think of it, like it's like the countdown. Yeah. I'm sure it's going to go well. And I'm sure that I'm equipping him to the best of his ability to give him the life skills. But I think about myself, and I think about how I grew up, and I think about the skills that I didn't have. I didn't have great skills in terms of what I ate. I didn't have great skills in terms of financial management. And I found that self-regulation became a personal problem for myself as I grew. It was great because as a creative professional, no self-regulation means there's no box to think outside of. But at the same time, in a personal life, it can have some level of impact. At the same time, what I learned is it's going to be okay. Right?
Yeah.
I am being cognitive about this. I am putting the pieces in place to help and, kind of given some sense of how other parents are doing this. I say this every show. I learn a lot from you personally, in terms of how I can look at the framework, and I really like the way that you parent overall because it does give me a different perspective.
We'll see in like 20 years.
Well, part of the reason that I like the way that you parent is I'm sure that if I had the same conversation with someone else that I was in a relationship with, or that like I parented the child, we might have a little more friction. But I think for you, it comes off as credibility and it comes off as kind of leadership. So thanks for that.
Wow.
What did you learn?
A lot of things. I have to say, coming in, so I had a lot of independence. At the time, we didn't call it autonomy. It was just a lot of independence and responsibility as a child. And so the topic kind of brought up a lot of, I didn't sleep well last night because I was just thinking through things, and I was like, well, am I paranoid? Because then I was like wondering if I am paranoid, because I think that's where a lot of it is rooted, is the fear of something happening to our children.
That's my joke, I say, is that the word parent is the Latin word for panic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So and a lot of it is and so I started wondering and really looking at myself. I'm like, well, I don't want my kids to do certain things. There are things that are off limits, but they are still 9 and 7. And so I do worry. And so I started thinking about that. But just from this conversation, and I'm glad I kind of came full circle because it's not all about the fear. A lot of the things that I am afraid of are things like traffic. I live in the city and right by a very busy intersection, and we have to cross a crosswalk every morning to get our kids to school, and cars run through that crosswalk all the time, even though we have a crossing guard, even though there's loads of kids, they're constantly.
I built my house. I had a choice of lots, and one lot was across the street from the park, and one was 2 doors down from the park. And that was my thinking. I will take the one 2 doors down from the park so they don't have to cross the street.
Yeah, so it's all those safety things. And so I'm like, I'm always so paranoid. I'm pulling them back. But then just from this conversation that it is about those responsibilities, building that independence, giving them those life skills, that we can all do. And we can do that in small ways, like allowing our child to fall when they're learning to walk, if that's how young your child is, or if they're a toddler, teaching them how to put on their own pair of pants so that, at some point they can actually do that, and then there will be less fighting as you're trying to do that.
Every time you give that example, I remember an old Stacy Keach thing where he's a dad, he's got a kid, and the kid's got a fork, and the kid's walking towards the outlet, and the mom's rushing in. He's like, no. He's got to learn.
Oh my God.
It's a comedy, right?
Okay.
But I
don't know who he is.
I smile every time you say that because it reminds me of that.
Yeah. So it's all those little things that we can do, and they're not going to be hard. But then there are things that we sometimes have to push ourselves out of the box. But that was probably something we could talk about at another show, on how we kind of push ourselves so that we don't limit our kids completely.
We don't want to create those millennials whose parents are dropping off their resumes for them. And,
Oh God, that would, now that I've seen that actually happen in my life, that stereotype being brought to life, that is my fear. I'm like, no, I don't want that to happen. And there are times where I have heard, Katie had said that she's learning to open up a little bit more based on, what she's learning from other parents in her neighborhood. And I think we learn the good and the bad. There are things we want to do. And there have been some lawnmower parents that have kids that are a bit older. They're probably more your oldest son's age, like they're in either getting into university or high school. And I hear what they tell me that they do. Like I remember one mom telling me that she bought a second finance textbook for her daughter so that she can learn along with her, so she can tutor her. And I just remember thinking, I do not want that to be my life.
Right.
When my children
you
go
want to retire at some point.
I want to retire from all of that everyday stuff of parenting.
Well, we're going to retire this particular episode. We want you to come by ParentsCanada.com. There's a brand new website. And in fact, I'm going to give you 3 great resources. There's some great articles that we've got on autonomy. The first one's called The Importance of Teaching Resiliency. The second one's really good. It's a lot of fun to read, which is Confessions of a Former Helicopter Parent.
Oh, yes, I read that one. That was good.
Deal with that. And should kids have more freedom? And of course, Katie talked about the fact of the 80s summer and the piece that she wrote. It is fantastic. So do drop by. We also want you to come back next week and come back with some thinking. Drop us a line. We're at Parents Canada on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. For now, I am Jason Thompson.
I'm Lisa Durante.
And you have been listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960.